right. Hello and welcome, everybody. See, Rob, you're right on time, man. You can do anything and everything. You
I
can
don't know
work.
about that, but I am here. And unfortunately, I only have a half hour, so we will have to plow right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have three main questions that I want to ask you, but just in case that there is maybe one or two people in the room that are not familiar with who you are, this is the guy. That's how I described you, the
The guy,
guy. A lot of people
that's
call you
so awful.
a lot of people call you the sugar guy, and I remember you saying I'd prefer to be known as the processed food guy.
Right, that's right.
Oh. So that's how I'm going to claim it right here right now in open public, the processed food guy.
Processed food. There you
Wonderful. Well, I know that about 11 years ago, I was introduced to you by my mother. And she said, "You have got to watch this." And it was an hour and a half long video. The title, "The Bittersweet Truth About Sugar," I believe was the
go. Close
title.
enough.
Close
Close enough.
enough. You'll find it. If you Google it, you'll find it. And it was an hour and a half long, and I had to watch it 4 times to think I get like maybe this much understanding of it. It just was so dense and so wonderful and so beautiful. Thank you. The thing that stuck out to me the most, being someone who has struggled with weight and all kinds of stuff, including abusing alcohol. And one of the things that you mentioned in there was that connection between the way that the body processes alcohol and the way that it processes sugar. Can you explain that a little bit more for us?
Sure. So, where do you get alcohol from?
Hmm.
Fermentation of sugar. It's called wine. We do it in Napa and Sonoma, just not today because there's no sunlight.
Not today.
It's a nuclear winter we've got today.
Yeah.
I don't know what this is going to do to the wine crop. Not good, though. Anyway, it turns out that sugar and alcohol uh, both are metabolized by the liver exclusively. And it turns out that the mitochondria, the little energy burning factories inside each of our cells, have to metabolize the intermediates from either sugar or from alcohol. And when you overload those mitochondria, and that can be either a shot of Maker's Mark or it can be a 20-ounce Coke, ultimately you overload those mitochondria. Those mitochondria have no choice but to take the excess that they can't process and they turn it into liver fat. So we have alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now we have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And they look exactly the same under the microscope, and they cause the same diseases, ultimately leading to insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and cirrhosis. And that's why we now have children who need liver transplants due to their soda consumption, in the same way we have adults who need liver transplants due to their alcohol consumption. Sugar is the alcohol of the child because it is metabolized that way. And of course, they both stimulate the reward center of the brain, which keeps you coming back for more. It's the pathway to addiction. So sugar
Wow.
and alcohol have metabolic, uh, neurologic, societal, economic similarities. And so you can actually turn to the alcohol control literature to determine what you need to do about sugar. We're not doing any of those currently as a society, but that's what I've been proposing is we should be talking about sugar in the same way we talk about alcohol.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's big because we have an age limit on alcohol. You're supposed to be 21 to drink, and
Indeed.
there is no limit. In fact, we are feeding the children the sugar daily.
Well, the other problem is that you don't find alcohol in food products,
Right.
but
It's not
boy, oh
an
boy,
additive.
but there is no amount of sugar that's verboten in, current food products, especially those that we give children, even those that we give babies.
I mean, it's funny, but not funny, right? I mean, there's going to be, I mean, there was a time that I was a little bit young at the time, but I remember being in an airplane with people smoking. I remember everywhere you went, people would be in the cars smoking. That is frowned upon nowadays, now that we know more information about what's really going on inside the body.
Well, it took 30 years.
It did.
Okay? So there have been count them, four cultural tectonic shifts in America in the last 30 years. And here they are: bicycle helmets and seatbelts,
Right.
smoking in public places,
Yep.
drunk driving,
Mm-hmm.
condoms in bathrooms.
Huh.
30 years ago, if a legislator stood up in a state house or Congress or parliament or anywhere around the world for that matter, and proposed legislation for any one of those four things, they'd have gotten laughed right out of Congress. Okay?
Yep.
Nanny state, liberty interest, get out of my kitchen, get out of my bathroom, get out of my car.
Yep.
Period. Okay? That's just the way it was. And today, they're all facts of life, and no one's screaming, no one's jumping up and down. We take all of them for granted. And if you pull out of your driveway and you haven't clicked your seatbelt, your kid will scream at you.
It's happened totally.
Okay?
The kids, once they know, right? Exactly.
That's right. So,
Yeah.
so 30 years ago, forget it. Today, fact of life. How'd that happen? And for those four, how did that happen? Answer: we educated the children. They grew up and they voted. And the naysayers are dead.
They passed on.
That's how cultural tectonic shifts occur. And unfortunately, it takes a generation to do it. It takes 30 years to do it. So we've seen that happen. We saw it happen back in the 60s as well. Bottom line is, there is a generational shift around this issue. It has started. It's about 7 to 8 years into that 30-year cycle. There will come a time, a few years from now, I can't tell you exactly when, maybe a decade, maybe 15 years or so, when people will walk down the street, see someone drinking a Coke, and feel sorry for them.
Because they'll know what they're actually doing to their bodies. Yeah.
Because they'll know. The same way you see someone smoking a cigarette now,
No. Oh,
and you
no.
feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
Okay? And that didn't used to be true. It used to be cool.
Way cool. It was sexy.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you smoke, you're a discard. You know.
Yeah.
So it's how society views it, and the goal is to educate the public, and especially the younger generation, so that they can fix it.
Okay, I'm on it. I got a 10-year-old, so I'm gonna be doing that.
Yes,
And
you
in
do.
this
Work on it.
Hmm?
You do, and
Yeah.
you work on it.
Yeah. In this group here, this month, we're talking about hormones, which is like the perfect time for you to come in and speak with
I
us.
love hormones.
Totally. So the first week we talked about cortisol. Last week we talked about, or this week we talked about leptin. Next week I'm going to be getting into dopamine. So just the way in which they interact and play with each other. And one of the things that I say, because, to keep things a little bit simple is helpful, because there's just so much when it comes to the body and the mind and the interaction and how it plays, that, other than things that you can't control, like, genetics or environment or things like that, there are 4 things that we actually can do and do on a daily basis that affect our hormones, either positively and we feel great, or not so great. And those 4 things that I say is that everything that we eat, everything we drink, everything we think, and everything we do has an effect on our hormones in our body and how they play out. Would you agree with that?
Certainly, they have effects on our metabolic health.
Yes.
Without question. All those things are true. The issue is, how do you know? And that's a tough one. I mean, that's where the science comes in. That's the issue. What I can tell you is that if a food industry concern tells you to do something, you should do the exact opposite.
Well, they tell us to balance what we eat, drink, and do, right? It's just about balance. It's just part of
And
the
you should
balance
do
meal.
exactly the opposite.
I've actually heard, and I love this phrase, that doing something 100% is actually easier than doing it 98%. That
There's
there's
some truth to that. There's
there
some,
is truth to that. So
right.
I really,
Bottom line is they have their own vested interests.
yeah,
We've
that's
learned a lot about people who tout things for their own vested interests in the last 3.5 years, haven't we? Okay.
true.
And the
Yeah.
question is, has that worked for anyone other than that whose interests are served? And that's the food industry too. And the bottom line is they want you to eat their food. Why do you think they put the sugar in the food in the first place?
Yeah.
Because it's addictive. Okay. The best way to explain this is the story of Coca-Cola.
Hmm.
Okay, does anyone know the whole story, the real story, not the Atlanta story, but the real story?
Only because you told me a few
Yes,
weeks ago,
indeed.
but yeah.
1886, John Pemberton invents this formula. He was an Atlanta pharmacist. The reason he became a pharmacist was because he was a soldier in the Civil War, and he was wounded in 1865 severely, and he got his first dose of morphine.
Hmm.
And he dedicated the rest of his life to making sure that he secured and took as much morphine as he could. And so he became a pharmacist, so he had ready access.
That's fair.
Well, that morphine addiction, cost him his health, his
Hmm.
family, his economy, basically destroyed virtually everything he had. And he needed to get off his morphine addiction. So
Hmm.
he put together a concoction that only a pharmacist could, that consisted of cocaine, alcohol, sugar, caffeine, all of which are dopamine stimulating or hedonic substances,
Yep.
and also carbonated water, which was thought to have hedonic properties back
Hmm.
when as well. And the only place you could get carbonated water was a place that could pressurize, and the only place that could do that was a pharmacy,
Hmm.
and that was the genesis of what we now call the soda fountain at the pharmacy. And so Coca-Cola was born. In 1888, he was still, by the way, the concoction didn't work. He was still just as much of a morphine addict as he was at the beginning. In 1888, he had reached his last dime, and he sold the rights and the patent on Coca-Cola to an Atlanta entrepreneur businessman named Asa Candler for $2,500.
Hmm.
And 6 weeks later, he was dead of his morphine overdose.
Hmm.
And Candler went on to, promulgate Coca-Cola in 1911. Robert Woodruff took over. They started putting it in bottles, and the rest of the story. So the bottom line is, hedonic substances are hedonic for a reason, and sugar is the hedonic substance that's legal.
When you say hedonic substance, is that one that stimulates dopamine? Is that what you
Correct.
mean by that?
Exactly. It's anything that stimulates the reward center in the extreme leads to addiction. And it can be a chemical addiction, cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, sugar, or it can be a behavioral addiction, shopping, gambling, internet gaming, social media, pornography, doesn't matter. Okay. They all stimulate dopamine. They all are inherently rewarding because of that dopamine stimulation. The problem is that dopamine downregulates its own receptor, which means you need more and more to get less and less. That's the phenomenon of tolerance, until finally you need a huge amount to get nothing. And then the neurons start to die because they're overstimulated. And now you have addiction. So tolerance leads to addiction. And anything that drives dopamine in the extreme leads to addiction. The problem with sugar is our entire food supply has been tainted. It has been contaminated. It has, because 74% of the items in the American grocery store have been spiked with added sugar on purpose for the food industry's profit, not for yours. Okay, they know what they're doing. They did it on purpose, and because they know when they add it, you buy more. So they have no reason to take it out because that's their gravy train, that's their juggernaut. Sugar is cheap, and they make loads of money on anything that they added sugar to. Problem is, it's killing us because of this liver fat, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome problem. Also, sugar is the primary driver of the aging reaction.
Yep.
Wrinkles, cataracts, Alzheimer's, okay, all driven by sugar.
So, in your practice and in your life, obviously, this is what you've been doing for a really long time. And I actually really love the story about how you were first introduced to nutrition, I believe, even before you went to medical school.
Yep.
And I just find it really interesting that, that whole let food be thy medicine, let medicine be thy food.
Well, that's a little simplistic. Let good food be thy medicine. Let bad food be thy poison.
I don't even consider that crap food. I'm like, it's a food-like product.
Indeed, if we actually changed the name, because processed food, because the FDA says it's food, but it's actually not food because it didn't come out of the ground or it didn't come from animals who ate what came out of the ground. It's been, reformulated, processed, things have been added, things have been taken out. Ultimately, it actually isn't food. Michael Pollan said, it's called, processed food-like substances. If we gave it some other name, it would be a lot easier to deal with. But, because people think Cheetos is food, we can't get past this. But that's exactly right. But the fact is, good food is medicine. Turns out there are 8 subcellular pathologies that belie chronic disease. I'm going to name them just so you've heard them. I'm not going to explain them, but they're in my next book, which, Rose, because I gave you a draft, called Metabolical.
Yes,
metabolic and diabolical, because metabolic is what happens inside your, what the workings of your body. Diabolical is the workings of the food industry. So here are the 8: glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, membrane instability, inflammation, methylation, and autophagy. Now, these 8 processes are what, when they are working right, you'll be 110 playing tennis. And when they're working wrong, okay, you will be on a dialysis machine, okay, and having had a stroke and not being able to get out of bed until you're finally dead at age 45. So these 8 processes matter. And it turns out when you look at them molecularly, if you look at the pathways, none of them are druggable. They're all foodable. But they're foodable in 2 different ways. They can be foodable positive, called real food, or they can be foodable negative, called processed food. And so good food is medicine, bad food needs medicine. Problem is we're eating the bad food, and so we need medicine, and it's not even working.
So you know all of this, right? This information, this knowledge, this understanding you have known for many years. I'm sure that you've added to your understanding as the years have gone by since that first video that I watched 11 years ago.
Sure, that first video talked about sugar. We now know fiber is equally important.
Yes.
Because fiber is the antidote. And so basically fiber mitigates that sugar absorption so that your liver doesn't get the tsunami from that 20-ounce Coke, because you didn't drink that 20-ounce Coke. You ate, say, a piece of fruit instead, and the fiber delivered that sugar further down the intestine so the bacteria could chew it up. You were feeding your microbiome. So ultimately, the 2 things that matter in terms of food is to protect the liver and feed the gut. Real food does both.
Okay, say
Processed
that one
food
again.
does neither.
Mhm.
There are
Say
some
that-
that are in the middle.
Okay, I know I got all excited, but I wanted you to say that again. That's what I kept saying. That is such an important little phrase that I'm going to have to put in a cool little picture and post it so that we can continue to see it and understand it and know it. Please say that one again.
So Michael Pollan famously said 7 words about nutrition. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. 3 clauses. Okay, they're all incorrect. They're all incorrect. It is true you have to eat food, but there's this thing called processed food, which is not food.
Yeah.
Not too much. Turns out when you eat real food, the not too much takes care of itself because of the fiber and because of fat, actually, which is satiating.
Yep.
And mostly plants also doesn't work because Coke, Doritos, and Oreos, they're vegan and they'll kill you. So the fact of the matter is those 7 words don't work. I have 6 words. Protect the liver, feed the gut. And any food that does both is healthy. Any food that does neither is poison. And any food that does either one or the other, but not both, ends up being somewhere in the middle. And we actually have the data that supports that. And so understanding these concepts and understanding how these 2 phenomena of protecting the liver and feeding the gut ultimately impact on those 8 pathologies, that's how you get better. That's how you prevent these diseases, how you reverse these diseases, how you can end up living to 110 playing tennis. And unfortunately, and I wish it were not true, but it is true, unfortunately, there's no medicine that can fix those 8 pathologies. So if you're going to eat processed food, it's just a matter of time.
That's just the reality of it.
That's the reality of it.
That's just the reality of it. Paula had a great question. I actually know the answer to this question, but you could probably do it simpler than me. She says, what about fiber supplements? Like,
Yeah.
can I just take Metamucil? Can I just chew on tree bark for a while?
Yeah. So actually, Procter & Gamble wants Metamucil to work because there's boatloads of money involved. The data on Metamucil is not good. It does not work. And the reason it doesn't work is because Metamucil is one kind of fiber, soluble fiber. It's psyllium, which is soluble fiber. They're little globules. They're roundish. They're microscopic, but they're round in shape. There's another kind of fiber called insoluble fiber, like cellulose, like what holds, like the stringy stuff in celery. Okay, soluble fibers like pectins, like what holds jelly together. Okay, now real food has both. When you eat real food, what happens is the cellulose, the insoluble fiber, forms a lattice work, like a fishnet, on the inside of your small intestine. And then the soluble fiber plugs the holes in that lattice work. And together they create a secondary barrier that prevents absorption of glucose, fructose, sucrose, starch, other disaccharides across the intestinal barrier. And by doing so, you're protecting the liver because it doesn't go straight to the liver. You're lowering the glucose response, so you're preventing glycation and oxidative stress. And what you're also doing is, because you're not absorbing it early, that those sugars will go further down the intestine, by peristalsis, the movement of the food through the intestine. And so it will enter the next part of the intestine called the jejunum. And that's where the bacteria are. And once the food gets to the jejunum, it's a free-for-all, whether the bacteria chew it up for their purposes or whether you absorb it for your purposes. So the point is, if you can get past the duodenum, you're feeding your gut. So the fiber, and you need both, will protect the liver and feed the gut. but the fiber both fibers only come in real food. Psyllium, like Metamucil or Fiber One bars or any of these other things that are spiked with added fiber, only have soluble fiber, because you can't add insoluble fiber to those kinds of foods. So bottom line is, processed food still doesn't work, even with fiber supplements.
Right. Well, what's funny is they take the fiber out to have a longer shelf life, and then they sell the fiber back to us because we actually needed it for our health. It's like,
That's
come on,
right.
just the real food.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
So bottom line is, it would make a whole lot more sense if you just ate the real food in the first place. Now, it is true that real food costs more. I'm not arguing that. That's true. And that's a problem in terms of our current food economic model. On the other hand, diabetes costs way more. And if you ate real food, you'd be eating less. So even though it costs more, you'd be eating less. So it would end up costing you less. It just doesn't look like it when you buy it at the supermarket.
Not right away. Nope.
Because if you eat processed food, you're probably eating 4 or 5 meals. And if you ate real food, you probably only need 3, or sometimes even 2. So even though it costs a little more, it's actually way cheaper in the long run.
Well, I don't know, when Chef Cindy did those cooking shows, a couple of times she broke down what it costs per meal, and it wasn't more than going to a restaurant.
That's right. That's right. Your mom showed us, very clearly. If you are a smart shopper and a smart cook, okay, you can actually save money by eating real food. Yep. And it won't even cost you a lot in time.
No.
By the time you wait for something to heat in a microwave, you actually could have made it on the stove, and it will have been a whole lot healthier, a whole lot safer, a whole lot tastier, and a whole lot better for you longevity-wise.
Oh, I know. I know that you have to go, and I just really want to thank you so much for your time. I do want you to have at least a minute to talk about your book real quick. Even just the name of it is awesome. Metabolical, The Lure and Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine.
Indeed. So basically what this book is going to do is, it's an iconoclastic book. It's going to basically take down the straw men of the entire medical profession. That is the doctors, the dietitians, the dentists, big pharma. It's going to show why nutrition is the cornerstone of good health, not anything that the medical establishment can throw at you. It's going to show why processed food is so dangerous. And it's going to show you how you can basically fix your life very easily. And not only that, while we're at it, fixing the environment too.
Sounds awesome. I am so excited. I'm going to put the link. You guys, they can order it now, right? It looks like it's on Amazon.
It's not yet.
Not yet?
No, we don't have a launch date. It'll be out probably in March.
It's on Google though. It's out there. You can find the name.
It's going to be published by Harper Wave, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, and hopefully it'll be out in March. It's going to be called Metabolical. There'll be a website and all that.
So amazing, man. You must have a little bit of backlash for that, and maybe that's for another conversation. But you know what? You got us cheering you in the corner, going, yeah, hello.
Well, I'm cheering you as well.
Awesome. Such an honor and a pleasure. I really appreciate it, Rob.
Always, Rose.
See you soon.